Hey everyone, Nathan here, Absurd Being. All right, let me go through this for you. You've seen it in the title, I'm sure. Phenomenology of perception. So we're in the final part 3, being for itself and being in the world. Second video of the first chapter, the Cogito. Okay, that wasn't so painful. So the last video we looked at the subject's relation with the world and the subject's relation with him or herself through psychical facts. Today we're just going to continue on exactly from where we left off in the last video, and we're still talking about the subject's relation to him or herself, but this time we're looking to acts of pure thought. So we're still trying to understand, we're still talking about the Cogito. So Merleau-Ponty is still investigating, is there a place where, or is there something which we know through and through, which is completely transparent to us, which we can know with absolute certainty, something that marries up with Descartes' idea of this Cogito, of this mind that is purely itself, that knows itself through and through, that's transparent to itself. So we're still looking for that. And we found that it didn't happen for us with psychical facts, feelings, and we looked at love in particular. So we're turning now to these acts of pure thought, pure ideas, pure mental, the pure mental realm is kind of what we're looking at here. Does the self absolutely coincide with itself there? And on first thought you might think yes, because there's no trace of any externality there. This is, the realm of pure mentation is completely self-enclosed. It's completely isolated and independent. So in theory, what we think in such a place must be true, because it doesn't refer to anything else. It doesn't refer to anything outside. And so Merleau-Ponty is going to investigate that through the example of a triangle first. So he talks about, if we've got a triangle drawn on a piece of paper, adding extra lines to it in order to prove that the angles sum to 2 right angles. I tried to draw the diagram that Merleau-Ponty was talking about. I just couldn't figure it out. Maybe it's because I'm not a mathematician, but I just could not see what he was getting at. But anyway, that's what he's talking about. So you've got this triangle, adding lines to it in order to prove something, in order to logically define or prove something about the triangle. And we can do this, he says, so it's possible. And one way to understand this is that it's giving us access to the triangle, or it's enabling us to understand the triangle if we start from a purely mental eidos, or an essence. So the way that we can grasp this triangle is through a purely mental idea, an act of pure thought. So this is quite Husserlian, and Husserl talked about getting back to the eidos, the essence of a thing, and that was part of what the phenomenological reduction was about, was stepping away from, or bracketing off, the things in the world around us, getting to this deeper truth. Unfortunately, that's the exact opposite of everything that Merleau-Ponty is about. A logical definition of a triangle can never equal the triangle grasped in perception. And we've seen that in many places. Perception always overflows our intellectual capacity for grasping whatever, anything, an object. So it's the same here. Even a logical definition it's never going to match what we see in perception. The original understanding of the triangle, the place where its certainty was established, the place where its truth was established, is in perception. That's the first part here. That's the original grounding that we have for the triangle. Going the opposite direction, and from that we can build we can build these logical definitions. But the way that Husserl in particular was thinking about it, and the way that it's been typically viewed, I think, is the other way around. We start from this intellectual, rational idea or essence, and then go from there to our understanding of the thing in the world. So basically Merleau-Ponty's just reversing that. And again, that's something that we've seen him talk about time and time again. The triangle, the original triangle that we grasp in the first place, is an object in space, an object configured by relations, up, down, left, right, angles. All of these things serve to outline the triangle, to give us an understanding of what the triangle is. Those are the features that make the triangle appear for us, not this other mental idea first. So first the triangle appears as an object in space. So we have then something like a material essence, and that's what Merleau-Ponty calls it. So what is this material essence of the triangle? Basically, it's a pole towards which my movements are directed. So it's something which I orient myself towards. And it's something I take up. It's something in the world I take up through my body, through my actions. All of those good things that we've talked about before. Let me give you a quote. I examine the triangle. It exists for me as a system of oriented lines, and if words like angle or direction have a sense for me, this is insofar as I situate myself at one point, and from there tend toward another point, insofar as the system of spatial positions is for me a field of possible movements. This is how I grasp the concrete essence of the triangle, which is not a collection of objective characteristics, but rather the formula of an attitude, a certain modality of my hold on the world, in short, a structure. This is an act of productive imagination and not a return to the eternal idea of the triangle. And that's that repudiation of, I haven't read Husserl, but that's how I understand Husserl. That's what I understand Husserl to be saying, that we need to go through these reductions in order to get to this eternal idea, these essences, these eidos, or the eidos of things. And so Merleau-Ponty's just completely distancing himself from that position. The construction, like everything, the thing, the object, the triangle, is a gesture which I take up, which I engage with, which I orient myself towards from a particular point, situated in a particular context. Everything's inclusive here. It's very holistic. We're not going back to some type of mental realm here. Even the things that seem to be purely mental, purely logical, turn out to be grounded originally for us in a material, concrete sense, some things that we engage with, that we act towards, that we orient ourselves towards. We don't survey the triangle as a spaceless, transcendent being. We're in the world with it. And suddenly, we're back to motricity. We're back to the body. The perceiver of the triangle, far from being a constituting consciousness, is actually a motor subject. And things that we've talked about before with the body isn't an object, and its movement isn't displacement in objective space. Rather, the body is perspective, and its movement is motion, which generates space. I think we've talked about that before, but that's a nice idea, you know. The movement of the body generates space. Without that, there is no space in the first place. It's an original intentionality, the movement of the body. It's a manner of being related to the object. And so inasmuch as the geometer's thought relies on this more fundamental, more originary projection, it does not coincide with itself. That is to say, it is transcendence. So this, so what we have then is the same as we found with psychical facts. An act of pure thought isn't locked up in itself. It's not a purely mental phenomenon. It's beyond itself. It's in the world. It transcends itself. So again, we've found that there is no isolated, independent cogito to be found here. There isn't a place where absolute certitude can be had. We're always directed out towards something else, towards something uncertain, towards some ambiguity. There's always an object appearing on a background, you know. So all of these, even with pure logic here, even with things like, you know, mathematics, geometry, we're still originally our understandings are grounded in the world, grounded in our concrete relations with things in the world. So the proof of the right angles isn't derived from an eidos, from an essence. Rather, the essence and the properties of the triangle are only possible because I have already had the perception. So that's a nice spin on that. So then Merleau-Ponty turns to talk about the body as the condition of geometrical synthesis. So that is the body as the condition of geometrical synthesis. It's the body beneath. The body is what's grounding our understandings of logic and mathematics. But he goes on to talk about it also being the acquisition of a cultural world through speech. And so we talk a little bit more about speech here. I'm not sure if there's anything particularly new. I think we've talked about most of this before, but I'll run through it again. It's in the book. It's good to, and it's always good to go over this stuff again and again. I mean, I just want to keep talking about it again and again. Just eventually it's going to sink in so that it'll be, there's just so much stuff. There's just so much content, I find. It's really hard to wrap my head around it all, you know. As soon as when I focus on one idea, then it's like there are 15 others that I'm kind of forgetting about. So it's good to just keep going over this. So speech, we've seen before, rather than being mere clothing for thought, speech is the way that thought transcends itself. Again, there's that idea. Even speech is not something that we think we generate, you know, completely internally, locked away from anything external. But that speech, that's not the case. Speech is actually thought transcending itself. So we still don't find this little core of cogito, which is absolutely certain anywhere. If speech were just a system of signs for significations that we already possess, language couldn't teach us anything. And that's not our experience of language. We've already talked about the way that speech is an original gesture. It's a modulation of the body. So it's something that, you know, we don't think first and then speak. Rather, we speak, and that's thought itself. You know, that is the thought manifesting. It's the thought, and not even that, because even that sounds like the thought was there prior. Speech is that thought in its first appearance. That's what we have to get away from, this idea of thinking that, you know, we've got that thought hidden in the background and that's certain and it's complete in itself, and then we're just tacking on or interpreting, we're translating into speech so that other people can understand my thought. But that's not what's happening. Speech is my thought coming out into the world. It is the thought. There's no intermediary steps going on here. Speech is thought. So of course words are built on correspondences, such as the dictionary, the way that certain grammatical rules and things. But of course it goes beyond this. They go beyond this. They acquire their sense in ways that can't be fixed absolutely. So there's a little reference to Wittgenstein there, whom another guy I haven't read but really need to at some stage. But the words, they're not discrete objects with fixed meanings and definitions. We have those. We try to set up that framework, and we have to have it. But words take on their own meaning when they're used in sentences, when they're used in a particular context, and it's that there's something about words which you can't pin down. You can't pin them down precisely. As an English teacher, I found that sometimes things that I want to express, or students will ask me how to say a certain thing in English, and people give different answers, and I realized at that point that speech is really something fluid. It's not something locked down and complete and certain. And obviously over time speech changes, but it's different for different people as well. Different people have different impressions of words. Some words mean different things to different people, same word, but yeah, that's what it is. That's what speech is. It's more fundamental than we typically think. And Merleau-Ponty gives an analogy here of colours in a painting. So the painting itself overflows the sensory givens, which is the same with language. The sense of the words overflows the individual significations, the individual definitions that you can find in a dictionary. The quote, "For the painter or the speaking subject, the painting and the speech are not the illustration of an already completed thought, but rather the appropriation of this very thought." That's a really great way to put it. Speech is the appropriation of a thought. So it's not just externalizing an already pre-existent thought. It is the appropriation of that thought. It's hard to put it in, to think of a better phrase, but it's grabbing that thought in its essence, in its inception. That's really what I want to say. It's getting the thought. Speech is getting the thought as it was first thought. It's not, we didn't have the thought and then the speech. The speech is the appropriation of that thought. It's the grasping that we by which we take up that thought. I'm just saying the same thing. I'm just trying to flesh out this idea of appropriating the thought, which is just such a nice way to put it. And always, whenever I read the word appropriation, I always think of Heidegger, and that's always good too, because Heidegger uses that word appropriation in a really interesting and productive way, I think. Okay, so let's keep moving. Two kinds of speech. Merleau-Ponty distinguishes between two kinds of speech: secondary or empirical speech. And so this is speech which conveys an already acquired thought. So we've already had the thought, perhaps it's already been produced in speech, and we're just reproducing it. So there's nothing original there. The second kind of speech is originary or transcendental or authentic speech. And this is speech which first brings a thought into existence. So this is speech as the appropriation of a thought. This is speech which is thought. So the conclusion from this little section is that thought is not self-possession or the coinciding of the self with itself. Thoughts are not fully formed objects within us. Rather, our thoughts transcend us. It's really a nice way to think about this and a nice way to put it. Our thoughts are not things inside of us that we can just pull out. They are, big silence there as I try and get my thoughts together. There you go, thoughts. Yeah, our thoughts transcend us. They're beyond us. Not in some kind of airy-fairy metaphysical sense that thoughts are out there and we're like tapping into them or something like that. But they transcend us in the sense that they're not localized objects within us, fully formed, that we can just pull out. It's more creative than that. The thoughts, as we speak, the thoughts are manifesting. They're appearing. We're creating those thoughts as we speak them. So there's no sense in which the thoughts are things that, or there's no sense in which thoughts are things in the first place, and things that are inside of us, i.e. things that we can know and be certain about through and through. They're not things we possess. So there's no certitude with them. They are, by their very nature, they transcend what we are. They transcend us. We don't have complete control over them, is another way to think about it. And in the same way we saw with psychical facts, language is clear until we try to analyze it and make it explicit. Language is certain when we're involved, when we're engaged in it, when we're speaking. There's no doubt. But the doubt arises as soon as we try to show that there's no doubt. As soon as we try to prove that there's certainty here. As soon as we try and analyze it and demonstrate that it's certain, then that certainty fades. So for example, Merleau-Ponty talks about the expression, "I was waiting a long time." There's no doubt about that. There's no confusion. When I say that, everybody understands exactly what I mean. It's completely certain. But if we break it down, then if we try and analyze it bit by bit, then we've got this word time. We've got this word long. What do these things refer to? If we try and break those down, then we just find ourselves in a massive quagmire. So when we're using the words, they're certain, they're clear. When we're engaged, when speech is being used in a real world situation, there's no doubt. But as soon as we abstract speech out from that situation, then things become unclear. So that was exactly what we saw with psychical facts too. Remember that our feelings are certain when we're living them, but it's when we step back, then things become uncertain, unclear. So I've got a quote: "Thought transcends itself in speech, that speech itself establishes the concordance of myself with myself and of myself with others, upon which the attempt was made to ground speech." I think I didn't read that very well, and it's kind of taken out of context, which was also a little bit strange. But the idea is still clear. Thought transcends itself in speech. Speech itself establishes the concordance of myself with myself and of myself with others. So that's interesting. Speech establishes that concordance of myself with myself. We usually try and ground speech the other way, right? Grounding speech in a self. But again, this is the way Merleau-Ponty operates, reversing all of those kind of common sense notions, or we're bringing things back to common sense. There's another way of thinking about it. Okay, so let's look at temporality next. Merleau-Ponty has a short, talks a little bit about temporality. So first, to say that an event takes place means that that event, whatever it is, speech, perception, takes up a heritage of the past, incorporates the past into the present, and welds this present to a future. So temporality is at the core of every event. And he talks about seeing Van Gogh's painting. And this is what he says. Van Gogh's painting is forever established in me. A step has been taken that I can never take back. And even if I hold no precise memories of the paintings that I have seen, my entire aesthetic experience will from then on be that of someone who has known Van Gogh's paintings. An act defines us forever, even if we have subsequently disavowed it and changed our beliefs. Existence always takes up its past, either by accepting it or by refusing it. So that's a nice little quote there. The past isn't something that we can explicitly recall. It's not our explicit memories. Rather, it acts more like this background on which the present plays out. So that's a really nice way to think about this. The past, it's not the things that we remember. It's not our explicit memories. It's this more hazy, ambiguous field in which we live our present. So seeing Van Gogh's paintings, even if I forget the specific paintings, from that moment, just the fact that I've seen them changes the person I am, changes my future perceptions, my future impressions of other paintings. From then on, my aesthetic experience will be that of someone who has seen Van Gogh's paintings already, even if I don't explicitly remember them. So, there's just so much good stuff here. So in this way, every act lays claim to eternity. So that, and this is a quote, eternity is not a separate order beyond time, it is the atmosphere of time. So that's an interesting reversal, another reversal. Eternity, it's not beyond time, or it doesn't transcend time. It is time itself. It's the atmosphere in which time exists. Eternity pervades time. I like that. That's nice. The next thing that I want to talk about is this kind of relation that Merleau-Ponty raises between the founding and the founded. So this talk about temporality means that every truth of reason also contains a coefficient of facticity. So everything that we think is purely mental, that we think is purely rational, is built on prior experience, built on our past experiences. And so the way that we see things is always influenced by things that we have seen. So this extends through to truths of reason as well. It means that there are no pure truths of reason. All truth is situated and grounded in the world. And this is just because the truths of reason that we take up, the way that we understand truths of reason is always contingent on experiences that we've had. And you may think that that's a strange thing to say, because surely truths of reason they're eternal. They transcend our experiences. But, and Merleau-Ponty doesn't talk about this, but I've thought about this with mathematical truths and mathematics itself, which seems to be something completely divorced from concrete reality, something completely abstract. And it is, but it has its groundings in the world. You know, if we didn't inhabit a world of 3 dimensions, a world with objects that appear in space and in time, would our mathematics still look the way that it does? I don't think so. Mathematics is, mathematics ultimately it's lines, it's shapes, 2-dimensional, 3-dimensional shapes. But these are things that we've seen around us, that we've experienced. These are things that reflect our lived experience, our perceptions. So I think even even things like that, even logical truths, even mathematical, geometrical truths, they're grounded in our facticity. They have a coefficient of facticity there. They're dependent on our prior perceptions and our experiences, even if those, or especially when those experiences are universal. All humans have the same types of experiences. We all see things in 3 dimensions. We all we experience time and space in the same way, so and because we all have those same perceptions, that same framework, our mathematical truths and our logical truths seem transcendent, more than they actually are, I think. I've got an image, which I'll put up in a moment, but this is where Merleau-Ponty talks about relations that phenomenology calls founding. And that is, when he says phenomenology, he means Husserl. Husserl calls these relations founding. So anyway, here's the diagram. So on the left side there we've got founding, and these are the incomplete structuring elements. So these are the ambiguous background on which things play out for us. So we've got things like time, fact, the unreflected, language, and perception. And these each match if you look across to the founded side, where the founded is the explicit reasoning element, and these match directly across from each other. So time matches with eternity, fact with reason, the unreflected with reflection, and language and perception both match with thought. And so these are kind of like opposites, where you've got the founding. Time on the one hand is the ambiguous background, which eternity appears within. And so I've tried to make that relation between the founding and the founded, a bit clearer. From the founded to the founding is a making explicit of the founding, and the founding appears through the founded, the thetic. So we have these, and that's actually a way to think about it. The founding is like the non-thetic, and the founded is the thetic element. But both are required, both are important here. So it's not a case of we're trying to dispense with one. Both of these work together in order to produce our reality. So what else do I have? Every consciousness is perceptual and is built on the past. Okay, we've talked about that. So in order then for evidentness to be possible, and so by evidentness, Merleau-Ponty means no presuppositions, just thought penetrating itself, just pure thought. In order for this to be possible, we would have to no longer perceive or contact the truth in any way that we're familiar with. Here's the quote. In other words, rather than being myself, I must become a pure knower of myself, and the world must cease to exist around me in order to become a pure object in front of me. So we would have to, in order for there to be this pure self-transparency, in order for my thought to completely penetrate itself, in order for evidentness to be possible, we would have to completely distance ourselves from ourselves. We would have to appear as an object before ourselves. And of course we can bracket our beliefs and opinions and take a step back and look at them as if they were objects at a remove from us. But ultimately, even that, we haven't effected a true break. We haven't actually reduced ourselves to an object in front of ourselves. Obviously, because I'm always the one doing the thinking. If I bracket out my opinions and my beliefs and try and see them objectively, yeah, I can do that. But I'm still the one doing the seeing. I'm still the one doing the looking. This is where the subjectivity is, and it's always here. I can't get behind that. So I'm always myself, and I'm always myself which has been exposed to these perceptions in the past. I'm always the self that comes to any situation with this coefficient of facticity. We're never able to separate ourselves from ourselves like that. Whatever we think or do is always against the background of previous beliefs and actions, and like I said, I can never apprehend myself as pure thought because I am always the one doing the apprehending. So that's that evidentness. So there's no way we can get kind of a presuppositionless, truly transcendent, isolated, independent thought that is completely transparent to itself. So another way to say this is that no evident truth is immune from doubt. And that's recycling or bringing back this idea of doubt, even in acts of pure thought, no matter how hard we try to make them objective, purely rational, purely the pure eidos, no matter how hard we try to get to that, no evident truth is immune from doubt. Here's my quote. The consistency of a perceived thing, of a geometrical relation, or of an idea is only obtained if I give up the attempt to make it explicit everywhere, and if I come to rest in it. From the moment I've entered the game or engaged in a certain order of thought, whether it be, for example, Euclidean space or the conditions of existence for some society, I discover evident truths, but these are not irrevocable evident truths, since perhaps this space or this society are not the only possibilities. Thus, it is essential to certainty that it be established given certain reservations, and there is a form of opinion that is not a provisional form of knowledge, destined to be replaced by absolute knowledge, but is rather an originary opinion in the double sense of original and fundamental. This is what makes something in general appear suddenly in front of us, to which thetic consciousness, either doubt or demonstration, can subsequently be related in order to affirm or deny it. Right, so that is a long quote, and that is quite long, quite hard to read, such a long quote. Anyway, there are a few things I wanted to talk about in there. First, this is the same thing we talked about earlier with doubt. A proposition can only be consistent or certain if I give up the attempt to know it as such, if I give up the attempt to make it explicit everywhere. Its certainty only appears when one is engaged, when one is active, when one is taking up the world non-thetically. But then, when one is doing that, one isn't thetically aware of the certainty. So there's like a catch-22. You can never, in order to be certain, you have to step back from that certainty that you were engaged, that you had while you were engaged in the act. But as soon as you step back, you're no longer engaged in that act, so it no longer carries the certainty that it had at the time. Remember, we saw that with speech, that great example. I've been waiting a long time, very clear, very certain, until we try and break it down, until we analyze it. As long as we're in it, as long as we're in the world, actively engaged, then we have certainty. As soon as we try and derive that certainty by making it explicit, by breaking everything that we're doing down into details, then we lose that certainty. Second thing, engaging, so the only way to know a thing certainly, means experiencing. Hence, adopting a certain field of thought, a perspective. And this is precisely to have made certain presuppositions. So we're never, no matter what we do, no matter how we try and slice it, how objective we try and be, in order to experience, you have to experience before you can be objective about that experience. And in order to have that objectivity, in order to try and get to that objectivity, you have to have had an experience, which means you've already been tainted. You've already got reality all over you. You're no longer objective. And you can never be. Remember Van Gogh's painting. As soon as you see those paintings, forever, you're someone who has seen Van Gogh's paintings. Your aesthetic impressions and intuitions are forever changed by that, even if you're not explicitly aware of the memories of those paintings. And the third thing I wanted to mention is that we're not progressing towards any kind of absolute knowledge. It's not that we're currently in a state of opinion and eventually we're going to be able to replace it with some type of complete, comprehensive, absolute knowledge. All that we have is this originary opinion, this opinion which is grounded in our perceptions, this opinion which has this coefficient of facticity, because it's this originary opinion, as Merleau-Ponty says, in the sense of original and fundamental, that makes something in general appear in the first place. So you can't get away from that. If you didn't have that, you wouldn't have anything appearing before you at all, in order to gain any kind of knowledge about, in order to affirm or deny. You have to have that originary opinion, which is the understanding that we gain from being in the world, from being engaged with things, from taking things up, from orienting ourselves towards them, all of those things that we've talked about. So evidentness is impossible, but Merleau-Ponty talks about a phenomenological conception of evidentness. And the quote he gives, or the quote I'll give you for this: "I think, and such a thought appears to me as true. I know quite well that it is not unconditionally true, and making it completely explicit is an infinite task. But the fact remains that at the moment I'm thinking, I think something, and that every other truth, in the name of which I would like to devalue this one, if it can for me be called truth, must harmonize with the true thoughts I have experienced." So there are facts. We can be certain. We have truths, but they're not separable from me. They're not absolute. They're not purely objective. Nevertheless, they are facts, because they're implied in every conception I can form of being and the possible. They make up the ground on which being and the possible appear in the first place. So they're not they're not truths that we can make completely explicit. We're never able to do that. And they're never going to be unconditionally true. But these facts, as I understand them, these truths as I live them, they are what the world appears upon. They're what objects appear upon. They're the background that allow things to appear in the first place. And so in that sense, they're facts, even if they're not unconditional, even if they're not irrefutable or absolute in any sense of the word. But those things are chimeras anyway, that we can't get any kind of absolute truth like that, any kind of absolute certainty. Such a thing just doesn't exist. All right, let me hit a summary. So we started with this proposition in the last video: I can't be certain of the object I perceive, but I can be certain that I think I perceive it. And Merleau-Ponty is all about, in this video and in the last video, disproving that, challenging this idea that I can be certain I think I perceive it. So challenging that idea that there's certainty in the I think, in that cogito. And in this video we looked at the subject and him or herself through acts of pure thought. So the relation the subject has to him or herself through these acts. We found that they're uncertain. There's uncertainty there. Because even though they're pure thoughts, they are transcendent. They're not locked away, isolated, independent from the world. So we saw that ideas are grounded in my taking them up, and this was related to motricity in the body. We also looked at the way that speech is the way that thought transcends itself. Speech they're not just clothes. Words aren't clothes for thoughts. They are speech. The words are those thoughts themselves. They're thought transcending itself. We also looked at temporality briefly and saw that all events take up a heritage of the past, and this led us to the idea that the past is a background on which the present plays out, and all truth is situated and grounded in the world with this facticity. And then we looked at the founded relation, where we had the founding as that incomplete structuring element, and the founded as the explicit reasoning component, both being essential, both being necessary for human reality. And the subject's relation to him or herself was also certain, though, we saw. And it's certain when it's lived. That is to say, when we give up the attempt to make it explicitly certain everywhere. When we give up this attempt for absolute knowledge. And we're certain through this lived experience because it's implied in every conception of being and the possible. So this lived experience is prior to the truth. And the way I finished the summary in the last video, I'll finish the same here. Both subject and the world and the subject and the self are never completed syntheses, which are nevertheless self-affirming. So that also applies for this video. Okay, so that's this section. We've got one more to go on this. It's probably going to be a bit shorter, the last part of this chapter, the Cogito. Until then, thanks for listening, and I'll catch you in the next one.